Alrighty. We are now live. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou tēnei te mihi o te wā. Welcome to the Social Services Select Committee, Komiti Whiriwhiri Taki Ratonga Pāpore, Taki Hāpore. We are here today discussing in this session the Accessibility for New Zealanders Bill. We'll be here from 9:35 to 12:55 p.m. 5-minute break, and then we will be starting a fresh select committee process for charities. So with that, what I thought we could probably first do is a descriptor of ourselves, go around the room, the Zoom room, in order to support the accessibility of those watching on. So I'll start with myself. Again, I'm wearing simple black today, but I also have a metallic statement on the front of my black shirt. I'm blonde, blue-eyed, wear glasses, and I'm at home. My name is Angie Warren-Clark, and I'm based in the Bay of Plenty. Thank you. We'll go on to Tony, then Emily, then Jan, then Liz, then Teresa, then Anahila, and then Maureen. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tony Severin, ACT MP based in Christchurch. I'm wearing a pink shirt today. I've got red long hair and I have blue eyes, and in the back of me I have a picture of the old cathedral and the chalice.
Kia ora. My name is Emily Henderson. I'm the electorate MP for Whangarei, and I'm a Labour Party member of the government. I'm a 50-year-old Pākehā woman with short, grey, spiky hair, but not as cool as Jan Logie's. We just need to get that out in the open right now.
It's done
Big
now,
glasses. Yep, it's important. Big glasses, a patterned top with cream and blue, and quite big earrings, and I'm in my office in Whangarei today.
Thanks, Jan.
So I'm Pākehā woman in my 50s, big kind of red-black glasses, wearing a forest green dress with a little necklace on. My hair, while being spiky, has a whiff of a newly born chicken today, and I'm pleased to be here.
We need more details. The whiff of a newly born chicken. Okay, we'll get that later, I'm sure. Liz.
It has the quiff of a newborn chicken.
Oh, a quiff. I got the whiff. Sorry, I'm sorry, I misheard you. I was thinking, did you snuggle a newborn
quiff?
Yeah, I thought you'd snuggle a newborn chicken. I was very excited for you. Sorry, carrying on. We'll get back to professionalism now. Thank you, team. Liz, Craig.
Kia ora koutou, Liz Craig, Labour List MP based in Invercargill, and I've got blonde curly hair and I'm wearing glasses and an apricot jacket today.
Thanks, Liz.
Talofa, my name is Teresa Ngovi. I am the Labour MP for the Otaki electorate. I have brown skin, I have brown hair, and today I'm wearing a mana wahine t-shirt to remind people to smear your mea.
Very nice.
Kia ora, I'm Anahila Kanongata Asuisuiki, Labour List MP based in Papakura. I have an afro, I'm wearing black, and I am also wearing a pounamu.
Wonderful. And Maureen.
You're on mute, Maureen.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like Maureen can't switch it off, turn her mute off. So Maureen looks like she's coming from her home in the West Coast. She's a List MP based there. She has short, dark brown hair, glasses, and a very fetching pink jacket on today. So that's Maureen. All right, so with that, we'll commence with the first submission, please, from Helen Christianson, if she is able to join the room. Wonderful, Helen. I can see your you're in the Zoom room, if you could turn your camera on and your microphone. We have you for 10 minutes. There you are. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming in today. Appreciate not always the easiest on Zoom. We are here to hear your submission. Please take it as read, but we have 10 minutes with you. Your time starts now. It's 9:40, so you've got till 9:50. Thanks so much. We're in your hands.
Good morning. My name is Helen Christianson. This is my sign-in.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Christianson, tako ingoa. Good morning. I am a middle-aged but young at heart woman of Pakeha descent. I have brownish hair with black-rimmed glasses. My hair is up. I think my daughters would describe it as a mummish swirl, not a squiff. And I wear a grey long sleeve top, as it is a little cold this morning in Te Whanganui, Atara. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you this morning. I would like to acknowledge many who have come before me, and I do indeed stand on the shoulders of giants as I present this morning. I would like to share a couple of comments with you, but leave the majority of my allotted time to questions. Before I start, may I understand if any of the committee members themselves have access needs? Don't worry, I know that question makes people feel uncomfortable, and I really don't mean for you to answer. But that is the reality that many of us face on a daily basis. It's not can we go to an event, or can we watch the television, or can we go to a movie, or will my child even be able to access information at school? It's, can I get out the door to do this stuff? And it's not just the children, it's the entire family. As a parent, I see very clearly the impact of access or lack of access on my two children daily. As a mother, is one of my children worth more, valued more in society than the other? That's a very, very uncomfortable parenting moment every minute of every day. As you will have read, I and my two daughters have presented at a select committee before about accessibility in 2017. We have written letters, we've been on TV, and we've helped present a fairly sizable petition, and a captioning inquiry was launched. I told them I was coming this morning, and I asked what I should say. At first they said, "Don't waste your time, Mum, it won't make any difference." These are young New Zealanders soon to become voters. They said, referring to the previous select committee, that their last presentation would make a difference. And guess what? It hasn't. Shame on us as New Zealanders that that is the view of young people. They went on to say this bill is tokenistic at best. They don't hold back. Designed to make New Zealand look better in the eyes of the United Nations. Lipstick on a pig. I could go on. But I am the eternal and somewhat tired, optimistic advocate. So here I am again. If indeed it is true that a committee can be created without a law, then ask yourselves if Aotearoa really cares about access and inclusion. Why don't we have one already? Ableism. Create without any delay a police-styled 105 reporting service for accessibility issues. I can tell you that service will be very busy. If all it does is capture the issues, it will be very busy. enforce the standards we already have with consequences for non-compliance. I can find examples, our family meet examples, real situations every day. Lead by example and do not tolerate any lack of access within government services or services that are funded by government funding. For example, movies that are produced or schools that are built or events that are funded with government funding. If funding is required, make provision in whole of government budgets for this. New Zealand has a very rich history of online media, as an example. Is that accessible? I really feel very uncomfortable telling you that by far the majority of it is not. Make this legislation transformational and include requirements of the private sector. As it stands, we have a piece of legislation that perpetuates the illusion of access, but does not provide for it. Without access, children cannot learn. They cannot gain meaningful employment, and they cannot participate fully in society, and nor can their families. Access needs do not belong to a citizen of one political party. Human rights transcend political boundaries. Accessibility is a front runner to inclusion. My eldest daughter, the deaf one, gave a speech recently, and I will leave my closing remarks before questions to her words. Inclusion is more than committees and government policies, and more than a token of representation of a wheelchair user being cast in a TV advertisement. We must see beyond the tidy little boxes we all live in and confront the truth that what is good for disabled people will be good for everyone. Think text messages, which were ironically invented for the deaf. We need to confront our past failures head on and ensure that all disabled people feel welcomed, encouraged, and validated in society. Only then, when our hearts and minds are open, will the world be ready for full inclusion. And this is her closing remark. And trust me, when you do one day become disabled, you will realise just how much we need it. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Helen. A really good submission and written as well. We have a question from Tony and Maureen, and if time, I'd like to ask you one as well, but we only have a couple of minutes left. Thank you. Go, Tony.
Thank you, Helen. I was really impressed. You're one of our battlers, but I understand there's still only about 38% is being captured on TV these days for programs, and I know a lot of it is happening as programs are happening. Would that be about correct from what I've understand?
I think statistics can almost say whatever you want them to say. So there has been substantial progress, but as progress is made, the goalposts move. So you can choose to watch probably any on-demand service or any television program, but my daughter, and therefore our family, cannot. So yes, if you go back 10 years, it's a big change, but there's a plethora of information that is without caption, repeated on a media website, Stuff, New Zealand Herald, News Hub, on and on and on. These are videos that are used in schools. And I've spent my presentation talking about captioning. I could have talked about wheelchair access, which has also affected our family directly. I could have talked about funding in schools. There are so many accesses pervasive, which is really why I was so optimistic when I was told about this accessibility bill until I discovered it was a committee.
Thank you.
Hopefully we will be able to hear from Maureen.
Okay, very quickly. Thanks very much, Helen. We've heard a lot from people with disabilities over the course of these submissions saying that they are exhausted from the battle. But I'd like to know, in terms of the work that we have in front of us, this particular piece of proposed legislation, is there anything that you can see in it that we can do to strengthen it, to enable some of the things that you've talked about today, given its scope is quite narrow?
I actually think that is the problem. Fundamentally, we don't have a piece of pervasive legislation in New Zealand that supports the rights of persons with disabilities. But we could make a piece of accessibility legislation that set a high bar and a target to achieve some of those bars. This legislation does not do that. It doesn't give me, when we can't get access to an event or a television program or hospital appointment, when we can't do any of those things, who do I report? Do I send 100 emails? I've probably sent thousands by now. A Police 105 reporting service would go a long way to at least tell you the scale of the problem. At the moment, we have no statistics.
Thanks, Helen. Unfortunately, we do have to move on now. My question was going to be about the barriers register, but we will leave that for another day. But thank you so much for appearing. We appreciate it. Ka kite.
Mā te wā.
Mā te wā. We now have Etu and Karena Brown, strategic researcher, coming on. If we can unpin the interpreter for now so I could see the full screen, please. Thank you. Welcome, you've disappeared on me. Welcome, Karena. Good to see you again. We have you here for 15 minutes. We're running a little behind time, so we'll be going to 10:05. You still have a full 15 minutes to talk with us. Looking forward to your submission. If you'd like to leave some time for questions, it would be great for you to do so, but we are completely in your hands. Welcome to the Select Committee. Kia ora.
Kia ora, so I'm Karena Brown. I'm a strategic researcher for Etu, and I will leave you plenty of time for questions because I know that you will have read our submission. And the main point, again, we want to reinforce is the importance of actually having a worker's voice on your accessibility committee and on the selection panel for that committee. The workers in the disability sector and our disabled workers are well underrepresented in most statistics. As you would see from the submission, the disability sector is one of the worst when it comes to accessing employment, and their voice is a very important voice that needs to be heard. It brings a unique perspective because it enables them to talk about what it is like to actually be either a person working with disability or a person working within the disability sector. And both of those points are very valid points, and we just feel that that's an area that is missing at the moment from the Accessibility Committee, because I see this accessibility legislation as the first step in setting up for to improve accessibility for all New Zealanders, because often a disability is not visible, and that's quite a problem for people. I know, like for in our previous workplace, we didn't have to have a lift, and we were a two-storey building because it was a small building, and which made it actually inaccessible to anyone who actually had a permanent disability. But also when one of our people actually injured themselves at work and actually dislocated their knee, they were no longer able to go to the office upstairs. So there's a whole lot of things that need to be changed, and I'm hoping that what this committee is about is to be able to recommend to the Minister changes to legislation that will require accessibility to be improved for all workers in New Zealand, not just those who are actually currently with a disability, Because as a previous woman's mentioned, and she's actually right, any improvement for disability is an improvement for all workers. And that's why we just want to reinforce the need to have a worker's voice on this committee, because they'll see those important little things that are often missed when we're just talking about disability sector, if we don't actually look at how the workplace is set up for the disabled worker as well, and how the worker's voice is actually heard when those people are actually in those workplaces, and how it feels for them to actually how they're treated and their health and well-being. So that's what I wanted to reinforce, because you would have read our submission with all our points. Thank you.
Thanks, Karena. I have a question to start with. So you know the makeup of the committees,
Yep.
and so I guess my question is, would you see the worker being a disabled worker as well, so that they're making sure that we have experience on the committee as well as employment experience, or is this an either or?
To my point, it has to be either or. I don't want to actually, because as I said, often the disability might not be obviously known, but it is also because there is a whole issue around in the disability sector, people actually bring that unique perspective. And we do have a lot of really good disability workers who actually bring a really good perspective and a really good understanding, and who might have really good, strong family members. Of course, my preference would always be that it's a disabled person, because it's working with us, not for us,
Yes.
as is the Down syndrome theme for this year, for 2023. And I think that's a very important point. But I think for the CTU to actually for that nominations, I'm sure they'll take that into account. They have a disability representative sector within their structures that are workers. So yes, I firmly believe it probably should be, but I don't want to actually exclude someone who might actually bring a voice that is so unique and so important that could actually add to them because of their life experiences. Because often that also brings in where a person can't speak for themselves, they can speak for those people, especially though ones working that actually have the minimum wage exemption, which is a real bugbear for us at E2, that it still exists, and that we need to actually get that legislation through to correct that issue, that those people can get paid so low for doing the work they do, which is important work. And it helps them give them that feeling of well-being, and they should be recompensed for it the same way as any other worker should be. And so, but often then that's their voice that can't be heard that should be represented. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely have. Thanks, Karena. So CTU would basically apply a series of criteria internally to get the right person to nominate for this. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you nominate more than one, because I still think they should be part of your criteria for section that's been put into the into the thing, so they would actually nominate a little number that you could then select from. So there'll still be that feeling of ensuring you're getting the right expertise, because you'll see the makeup of the rest of the committee and see what's missing and what's needed.
Great, thank you. We'll go down to Anahila.
Kia ora, Karena, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm great. Hey, thank you. I love the way you put the submission through. You told us what you wanted and you gave us a process. Can you extend on recommendation 5? Because you're asking that the parameters be strengthened in terms of the committee and requiring the minister to act on it.
Yeah, because my concern is probably a little bit what the one said previously, that we're having this accessibility committee, but unless we actually give teeth to the minister and ministry to actually ensure that what the recommendations being put forward by this committee have to be actually be actioned, or at least have a genuine consultation around it. I've seen a lot of other committees where information's put forward and it's never acted on. And so they become a toothless organisation. And I really think it's important that if we're going to actually enable accessibility for people, that recommendations that come out of this committee have to either be actioned or have a really good reason why a genuine reason why they can't be. And it can't just be, oh, it's not something we want to prioritise at the moment, or we don't have the money for it. It has to actually be a much more better reason than that. And I think by making it accountable to the ministry and minister will actually enable that requirement to actually have them to actually address it, will enable it to actually give it some teeth and actually make some real changes for the for our disabled workers and non-workers and our disabled people in society. Because I think that's what this is about. This is that first step in getting an equitable society. And the only way we can do that is ensuring that it doesn't become a toothless organisation.
Thank you.
Thanks. We come on to Maureen Pugh.
Thanks very much, Karena. My question is also around the committee structure. I just wondered, especially in recommendation 1 that you've made, is a referral to the panel for membership on that. I wondered if you thought it could be strengthened even further by requiring that the appointment is made by the likes of E2, rather than nominating someone, because there's still no guarantee that the nomination will be accepted.
Well, the recommendation was meant to be that the CTU, there would be a workers' position on there, and that the CTU would nominate a number of people and that one would be selected. Because I thought that's what I was saying, that there's an expectation that would be a workers' voice on that committee, and that workers' voice would come from the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. But we want to ensure that there would be a variety of people put forward so that the committee could still look at what's important to make sure they have that widespread of knowledge and expertise, but that still be that workers' voice would be there, because that's often an underrepresented and undervalued skill that is absolutely vital if you really want to actually enable our disabled workers to actually have a voice, and also have a way of addressing the need to ensure how we can get more disabled people into the workforce, because that is a real problem we've got at the moment, is that there is such a low percentage of disabled workers actually able to access work, and it's often because the employers don't have accessible workplaces, or they don't see the value that can be added through someone from the disability sector actually being employed. And that's changing. I mean, Bunnings already is doing that now. They're already actually looking at, they have a specific program to actually how they can actually change their system to enable more disabled workers to work there, because they understand the importance of having people there representing everybody. And so we need a lot more workplaces doing that already. We need a lot more workplaces that make the space. We need government as well, government workplaces, to actually be more accessible and be more visible of disabled workers. We need them in positions of responsibility, and we're not going to get that unless we can have a workers' voice that actually says this government department actually has no one with a disability above the level of level 2. There's no one in middle management, no one in senior management. And without being able to see themselves actually in the workplace, they're not going to think of applying to those workplaces. And that's why I think the workers' voice needs to be there, but it also needs to be a variety of people being put forward, so the committee still can select who is the best for the expertise needs that they have, to ensure that that committee is the best committee can possibly be.
Sure. I have another one, Madam Chair.
Sure, you've got a couple of minutes.
Okay, thanks very much. Your recommendation 5 talks about by requiring the minister to act on any recommendations, and I'm just wondering how we keep track of that. Have you got any thoughts about the publication of any of those recommendations to the minister, and then the minister having to be accountable back for the response?
Yeah, I think in some ways I would see it like I'm a co-chair of a Canterbury Regional Schools Leadership Group, and we have to do a 6-monthly update to the minister, and the minister then actually gives us updates back as to what's been implemented and what's been changed from what we actually do. Same as we have to give advice to TEC, and I assumed, my assumption would be that this committee would work in a similar sort of way, that they would give annual continual reports to the minister, and there would be an expectation that the minister will actually report back on how those have been implemented and where they're up to. So they actually have probably an action register that can actually be accessed by anyone that can see how they what recommendations have been put to the minister, and then the minister has to update regularly what's happening with those recommendations and what part of the process they're up to.
Okay, great idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Karena. We've come to the end of time, but I just have to acknowledge it's a really good submission on a point that's really clearly been described for us. Thank you for that, and appreciate you coming before us today. Look forward to seeing you again, Karena. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ka
Ka kite
kite
anō.
Now, we have had a late cancellation from Ollie. So I'm going to suspend the meeting and we will be back at 10:10 for the Parents of Vision Impaired New Zealand. So 5 minutes, have a stretch, team. Thank you. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Welcome back to the Social Services Select Committee. We've just had a quick 5-minute break, and we are now about to hear from the parents of Vision Impaired New Zealand for 15 minutes. If we could have that organisation into the room, please. Hello, Rebekah. Kia ora, we see you again. It's good to have you back again, Rebekah. Look, are you having anyone else join you today?
No, it'll just be me today.
Great. Okay. Look, you know the drill. We have you for 15 minutes here. If you'd like to leave some time for questions, that would be great. And thank you for your submission. Very well expressed. So we are completely in your hands, Ngā mihi.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you for having me here today. It's nice to be back again. I've realised on reviewing my submission that what I should have said is that we, of course, completely support the recommendations by Access Matters. It's probably implied in there, but I realised it wasn't explicit. And as you will have noticed, obviously, you would have seen a lot of the work went into the Access Matters one. And my focus here today is really about our families. One of the things that came through, I noticed in some of the submissions that I've heard, is the impact on families. And we really wanted to reiterate that access isn't just about the individual, that when one of our children cannot access a building, it means the whole family cannot access that building. It means that we can't go out for dinner as a family with the whole family. It means we can't go on vacations together as a family. It means that we can't do events. A person yesterday was talking about going to the movies and the challenges, and that really resonated so much with our whānau because the lack of access impacts on the whole of the family, not just the individual. One of there's two major challenges for our families at the moment. One is housing. A lot of housing is insufficient, and it's not just things like hallways and wheelchairs not fitting in hallways, although that is part of it. It's things like if you need a hoist to move someone in a wheelchair, there often isn't room in some of the bathrooms or the bedrooms to have that hoist there. And then we have parents, with an older person now, children get older, they turn into adults, but sometimes they still need ongoing care. And then if you are in your 50s and having to lift someone who is an adult in and out of bed, in and out of the bathroom, it's incredibly dangerous. And the reason we're forced into doing that is that the housing hasn't been built to accommodate some of these needs. And while the recommendations are there, in terms of the building recommendations, et cetera, that's all been developed, it's not legislated, so you don't have to. And that, of course, impacts on our whānau. The other major issue that our families face is schools. And with schools, some of that is around the built environment of schools, but some of that is around the social environment. And it's very reliant. Access for our children to high quality schooling is very reliant still on individual schools, individual school principals, individual school boards, individual school leadership teams being willing and able to do the extra work to provide a fully inclusive environment. And it is a deeply frustrating, deeply hurtful experience for our families when the children are excluded from school. And this happens in really subtle ways. And I really want to emphasise the subtlety that sometimes this happens for our whānau. It is very rarely an overt, we don't want you here. It's more, we don't feel that our school would be a good fit. We're not sure that our school can really meet the needs of your child. We don't really have the resourcing that we would need. You'd be better off trying this other school instead. And as a family, when you're hearing that, what you're hearing is, not only we don't want you here, but we're not prepared to put in the work to make the school accessible for your child. And you've got to pick your fight. Is this a fight that you want to take on? And the other thing that's sliding in there is that there aren't a lot of levers, so that when you are excluded, you can write a letter to the school board, you can write a letter to MOE, but other than that, the only lever is the ombudsman, which is a 2-3 year process. So there's not the types of regulatory mechanisms that we need that are currently operating. And that is, from our perspective, the really missed part of this bill is the need for those regulatory mechanisms so that when you encounter those barriers, there's a very clear process of this is where you go and this is what will happen. And not in a harsh, punitive way necessarily. It's really just shifting that mindset of it's too hard, we don't have the money, to, well, we have to do it, so we're going to make it happen. As I mentioned yesterday, some of the government ministries are the ones that pushed for the bill that we have right now. And that's incredibly disheartening as a parent, hearing that, you know, some of these ministries that are responsible for providing education to our children aren't prepared to commit to something that will make it happen. And certainly an experience of our families over the last 20 years is that accessibility is still so often treated as a nice to have. And nobody ever says to us, oh no, your child shouldn't be able to access X, Y, Z. That is never the issue. The issue is that people then don't want to do the resourcing, that our children aren't seen as valuable and important enough to spend money on in order to make sure that they get a high quality education. And that is, again, implied more than explicit, but underpinning it always is that our school has limited resource. We don't want to spend our limited resource on your child because we don't think your child having access to a fully inclusive, fully accessible education is important enough for us to spend our money on. And in some ways, I think it'd be easier if people were just upfront that that's the case, but they're not. It's always, you know, that subtle coded, but that is underpinning it, a lack of value. And we would very, very, very much support having some form of regulatory mechanism as outlined by Access Matters so that we can progress accessibility to the next step. I think our society widely says, yes, access is important, but it's pushing it to the next step of making it happen and putting resource into it and time and energy into it and saying it's not just important, but it's a priority. And I've given a couple of examples in my submission. And one of the things that's really interesting, one of the things we noticed when families are new is how shocked families are at how inaccessible our society is. And it's something that a lot of people don't notice or pay attention to. Fully able people certainly don't notice and pay attention to because we've never had to. We don't notice it. And then often when it's a family member and then suddenly you're confronted with how inaccessible things are, and it's deeply frustrating. So yes, that is 10 minutes. So I have given you 5 or 6 minutes for questions if you guys wanted to ask anything.
I think's really, really good submission, Rebekah, really useful as well. And I just want to thank you for your passion and engagement in this process. I understand it's personal as well. And so just want to thank you for that. So look, my question is around, sorry, it's just a bit squeaky for a moment there. My question is around the barriers register that you've put in your submission. And this is something I've been picking up. You know, obviously there's a lot of themes coming through, but this is one that interests me in terms of practicalities, really. So you talk about a barriers register and the ability or the power of the committee to investigate. So I'm making a guess that the barriers register you're looking at is not something that's just going to sit there listing and recording barriers across, but it's actually the basis of a work program. Is that, am I thinking right? And so if that's the case, can you just tease out a little bit more about what you think a barriers register, how you see that operating, or because certainly, you know, someone has suggested a 105 call-in line or something, which in itself might not be accessible. So just tease that out a little if you could, please.
Sure. I think there's a number of ways that we could do that. Like, for example, I think of ERO with the education and MOE, the way in which you could actually include accessibility into that audit process that already exists. I think about our health and safety, about how we do that in terms of regulations and notifications, and you could build in accessibility into that already existing framework of checking and so on. So I think there's some things we could do that we already do where we could just put a bit more into that. I do agree that a phone line isn't always accessible. It would be great to have some way in which people could report very specifically and very clearly on the access barriers they encountered in terms of date, time, exact location, exact barrier. I think that would be also a really useful data set in terms of nationally and regionally. And you would, again, you'd need someone to follow up on it, but also somebody to collate it and analyse it, because that would be really useful to track, to go, oh, Wellington's horribly inaccessible compared to the Christchurch region. We need to invest, you know, into making sure Wellington's better. Or actually across the nation, the thing everybody's complaining about is the way in which footpaths are inaccessible. So we will invest into that. So that would be how I would approach it. Be interested in doing it.
Really useful, thank you. Maureen.
Maureen.
Good morning, Rebecca. Thanks. It's lovely to see you again. I'm just interested if you could tease out a few ideas around the accountability. So reporting on progress for recommendations from the Accessibility Committee to the Minister and back. So when you say that, what is it that you're thinking needs to happen?
I mean, it may be impossible or too big of an ask, but I really love the idea of combining the information we have where we can say, these are the barriers people have identified, this is what we're going to do, and this is when we will do it, or this is how we will support it. So if you're saying, actually, this region's really struggling, we're going to invest at a government level specifically for this. The other thing I'd really love to see is things like the existing sort of regulatory mechanisms, including that in their reporting. So when you are doing things like building assessments at a council, you're now reporting on exactly how access is being obtained or what type of access is being created or produced. If you are doing your auditing with ERO, now you are also including how accessible for wheelchairs is this school, how accessible for a blind user is this school, how accessible for a deaf child is this school. And you could create well, I think, I always think you could do it. You could just, you could include a matrix in there in those assessments that are already being done so that you're looking at it. And of course, as time goes on, you can go, this information wasn't so useful, we could do it this way instead. But you've already got the ERO is 1, 3 and 5 yearly, if I remember correctly, depending on the school. So you could start building that in and then again start measuring it. Well, this was identified 3 years ago, what have you done? And then there's that accountability without creating a whole new, thing. So trying to think about how we would just incorporate it into the already existing things and using something like that. I think initially too, we can probably have something that's maybe a little on the simple side as we get used to it. And then as we go further on, we could go, this is useful. Actually, it's too simple, review it.
So you would suggest that would be maybe part of the annual reviews for ministries, government agencies?
Yeah, I think we could do that. And not, I mean, there's always a temptation, isn't it, to make it super detailed, but I think we could start with something really simple.
Daylight, shining a light on it.
Yeah, and just start measuring it to start with.
Thank you, Rebekah. That's a really good suggestion. I used to do quality assurance on behalf of Ministry of Justice around family violence providers, and that wasn't a criteria that we looked at, but would have been really easy to build into our framework. So thanks for that suggestion. Appreciate it. We've come to the end of time. Thank you for your submission. Another day that you've taken out time out of your day to come and speak with us. So we do appreciate it. And thank you, really useful. Thank you for your discussion today. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. A kia koe. Ka kite. Right, we are now coming to the New Zealand Spinal Trust for 15 minutes. Oh, I see Andrew Hall is in the Zoom room. Andrew, if you could please turn on your camera and off your microphone, that would be great.
There we go. Oh, start video. Yeah. Oh, click.
We can hear you.
Yes. Hi.
Wonderful. Hello, Andrew.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, Andrew, we have you for 15 minutes. Please take your submission as being read. Thank you for it. And if you'd like to leave some time for questions, please do so. Do you want me to sing out at 10 minutes and let you know where we're at, or are you okay?
We should be fine. We've got a stopwatch at our end, so we'll track where we're going. Thank you. So, tēnā koe everybody, and good morning. From the New Zealand Spinal Trust, and on behalf of our organisation, I want to thank the Select Committee for giving us this opportunity to present. So my name's Andrew Hall. I manage the New Zealand Spinal Trust's peer and whānau support network nationwide, and my colleague here, Tina Morell, is our community marketing coordinator. So our organisation provides services and support across Aotearoa New Zealand to help people overcome challenges following permanent spinal cord injury or impairment. Our mission is to empower people with spinal injury and their whānau to embrace positive futures, and we provide support and information and services for those people to overcome challenges and pursue opportunities. On average, 210 people in New Zealand a year suffer of spinal cord impairment, and an estimated total of around about 3,500 people, New Zealanders throughout the country, living with spinal impairment. So the accessibility of our nation's built environment is supremely important to us, and is therefore an essential component of our ability as wheelchair users to embrace the positive future that we believe is the right of all New Zealanders. In particular, our work at both the New Zealand spinal units, we're very aware of the current shortage of accessible housing. Frequently, patients will be medically ready.
Excuse me, Andrew.
Sorry.
Your screen keeps going in and out of focus, and I'm not sure whether our interpreter can catch your words.
Okay, sorry.
I'm just wondering if you can set the screen or either the camera or something so you keep. Yes,
it may help to sit still, perhaps.
That's very hard to do. So good. It seems to have fixed it. Seems to have fixed it. Well, thank you.
I'll try and stay still.
Apologies for interrupting.
That's all right. The camera's just too smart for its own good. So we're very aware that frequently patients will be medically ready for discharge, but are unable to do so because they can't find a suitable accommodation to go to. So at approximately $2,000 per bed night, this is an unnecessary cost to our health system, let alone extending the wait times for others who are needing to get into the spinal units, these people blocking the bed. What often happens is, in order to get patients out the door, they'll be discharged to an accessible unit at a motel or into an old people's home, where they may have to spend months with their lives on hold while they wait for their house to be converted. And the retrofitting of accessibility features into people's homes is incredibly expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars paid for by the taxpayer, either through ACC or the Ministry of Health. With a much greater quantity of accessible housing stock available, finding a place to live following the sudden onset of permanent mobility, of a permanent mobility challenge like a spinal impairment, will be much easier. Now, we believe that the importance of accessibility throughout the built environment for disabled people, and in fact for all people, is probably very well understood by everybody on this call and this select committee. So we'd like to spend our time here suggesting some practical ways that we think the Accessibility for New Zealanders Bill could be modified in order to bring considerably more accessible properties to the housing market. Over the past few years, we've been very disappointed by the number of large-scale housing developments all over New Zealand that have been completed or that are currently in construction and planning stages that have little or no accessibility units at all. For example, in Christchurch, the Manchester Square development now being built in the central city has 104 units. Just 2 of these are described as wheelchair friendly. Now, these 104, half of them are townhouses and half of them are single level apartments. So 2 wheelchair friendly units, which allows a wheelchair person to get in the front door, is certainly not set up for them to live in. So that's 0 out of 104 accessible new builds. It's clear that despite a very conservative estimate of 10% of New Zealanders needing accessible housing, combined with an ageing population adding to the number of people experiencing mobility challenges, leaving it to the market to meet this need is failing. It would seem to be common sense that developers would supply a product that doesn't exclude a tenth of their potential customer base, but this is not happening. We're loath to suggest more red tape or that more compulsion on the market is required, but sadly it seems that in order to have the accessible housing stock that is needed now and for a need that is growing as our population ages, this market will have to be compelled. To do this, the effective development and implementation of good public policy is needed, and this accessibility committee, which is to be established under this proposed legislation, is the ideal body to lead this work. The committee should be granted the power to develop binding standards for ensuring that a set proportion of all future builds be fully accessible, as well as having that new housing stock adhere to the universal design principles. The work to create these standards should be subject to a consultative process that includes relevant organisations representing disabled people, tangata whaikaha and their whānau, the building industry and any other stakeholders the committee considers relevant. I apologise for this camera, I don't know why it's doing it. I don't think it's done it before, but anyway. These standards would include meaningful and achievable targets for the proportion of new dwelling builds which must be fully accessible and must apply to all multi-unit housing builds, whether they be funded by state agencies or private companies. In order to be realistic, we suggest that these targets will need to take into account the type of building proposed. For example, 2-storey townhouses, notoriously difficult to make accessible. However, 10% of these developments could be made accessible by adding a lift and obviously the internal design aspects to make it accessible. However, single level developments or apartment buildings with single level units could require at least 25% of the total to be fully accessible. The standards should then be established via regulations made under the Act such that only a construction project whose plans meet these agreed targets would be granted permission to begin. We recognise that not all sectors are amenable to binding standards and believe that it would be prudent for the committee to undertake a phased implementation process to the development of these standards. This will allow a more robust process for developing, testing, learning and adjusting that will hopefully ensure the standards are not onerously imposed. Furthermore, the Spinal Trust recommends incorporating accessibility standards and universal design principles into the building code for all regions and for all persons conducting a business or undertaking, such that codes of compliance would only be issued when these homes and principles are satisfied. The model for healthy homes provides a good template for this work. Why is it that healthy home standards have been incorporated into the building code, but universal design standards have not? We believe that the more parties throughout the economy that are made accountable to these accessibility standards, the faster and more effective improvements to New Zealand's buildings, in this case homes, will be. We note that the bill, as proposed, only applies to specified state entities, which include government departments, departmental agencies, statutory entities, and local authorities. In order to better remove accessibility barriers faster, these requirements should be extended well beyond this narrow scope of just state agencies to include all persons conducting a business or undertaking. So in summary, our submission is expand the scope of the Act and its proposed Accessibility Committee beyond just state entities to also include all persons conducting a business or undertaking. Have the Accessibility Committee develop appropriate accessibility ratios for multi-unit housing developments. The Accessibility Committee, in cooperation with local authorities, to be able to enforce these accessibility ratios on new multi-unit housing developments and ensure that universal design standards are incorporated into the building code. Thank you all very much and very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Andrew and Tina. A little bit dizzy watching your camera.
Sorry,
a little
I don't
bit
know
there.
what's going on with that. Yeah.
It is what it is. We could understand and hear you anyway. Hey, just want to thank you for a really good submission. We have about 4 minutes for questions, but I just wanted to ask you sort of in a side question, really. Do you think the Building Act is sufficiently fit for purpose currently for to ensure that accessibility exists within the Act?
No.
Yeah, thought so. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay,
I use the Manchester Square example, and so many people I talk to are gobsmacked that it got planning approval to go ahead, and of course there's nothing in, as far as we're aware, that would compel the developer to have satisfied any accessibility requirements.
Yeah, and I take your point, and thank you. I did want you to express that. Thank you so much, Andrew and Tina. We'll go now to Maureen Pugh.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Andrew and Tina. Very well understood your position around needing to implement, other legislation so that we can get some real change on the ground, especially in terms of the housing stock. But you've also suggested that it be extended into all PCBUs. And it's one of those things I think we can get some unintended consequences from. So just flagging it and appreciate your feedback. So some PCBUs will include, for instance, community groups that are hosting events. And, for some small operations, that may be a step too far in, especially for outdoor events. So I'm just wondering if you thought if there could be some flexibility around that PCBU recommendation you've made.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the event side of things is, constrained by it's up the side of a hill or that type of thing. You would hope that any event hosted in a venue would have an accessible venue because it's excluding those who can't get upstairs. So I guess the thrust of our submission, given we only had 15 minutes, was really to focus on the housing stock, the built environment, rather than access to events or what else people are up to. In my experience, I've been in a wheelchair nearly 40 years, and in my experience, there's been huge improvement around public spaces, around public buildings, around restaurants. These sorts of public access places have come a long way. But where it hasn't moved has been the private housing stock, and trying to compel the largest providers of that stock, developers and private companies who are doing this. It's not a state task to deliver on most of this stuff. So focusing just on the state is actually only getting a small proportion. You've got Karena as a state authority who's got a target, but I guess we're really interested in getting everybody else to play ball.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks. 1 minute, Jan, if you could.
Sure. Just a quick question in terms of any sense of how easy this would be, considering that we have LifeMark standards for universal design already developed?
Well, maybe naive, Jan, but I think it is very easy. I mean, we all know building it into the plan, making the doors that little bit wider, the wet area shower, the no step at the front door, all of that stuff is so much cheaper to do at planning and build stage rather than retrofitting. And developers have so much on their plate. They're all rushing to solve the housing crisis, presumably, or rushing to make money. Just being compelled at the start to put a bit more thought into it would not seem to me to be too onerous.
Thanks, Andrew and Tina. Good points, well made. Thank you so much. And I take your point. Private developers are part of the solution of housing in this country. So, it seems to be a great opportunity to develop a good business, surely.
Sure.
Hey, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Ka kite.
Thank you.
Now, we were going to have a quick break, but I understand our next submitter is here, and it was only going to be a 5-minute break, and we're 2 minutes behind. So we might just move straight on to our next submitter, People First, the local Ashburton group. Now, I understand we're going to have Megan Copland here. So I see you on screen there, Megan. Hello, Megan. I hope you're Megan. There we go. We can see you both on screen now. Welcome to the Select Committee. There's more than one of you here, so if you'd like to introduce yourselves, would you require a descriptor of who is in the Zoom room?
I'm Peter Tester.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the local assistant for the Ashburton People First group, and I've got 3 of our members here who made the submission, and I'm just here to support them. So they're just going to introduce themselves.
Thank you. You have 15 minutes.
I'm Peter Tester. Tungia Pakathy.
Thank you. So you've got 15 minutes to talk to us about your submission. And if you'd like to leave some time, we can give you, I can give you a wave out and let you know at 10 minutes. So we could, if you'd like to leave some time for questions. Does that sound like a good plan? Cool. We're in your hands. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou.
Do you want to start by saying what you think about the accessibility bill?
Well, I agree with the accessibility bill that it meets.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. I'm very sorry to interrupt, but your screen is buffering, which means that you're freezing. So it might be helpful we'll just see if it comes right. Otherwise, we may unfortunately have to have you off screen which will interfere with our interpreter's sign language. So we'll give it a go, but hopefully it comes right. Sorry about that. Back to your submission. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree with the accessibility bill, because here in Ashburton, it's quite difficult, like when you've got disability parking, they don't give you enough time parking, especially and to do what you need to do and then come back to the car. By then, you're getting tickets and whatnot because you've gone over the time, so they don't give enough time for them. We've got a shop here that doesn't actually, walkers only just make it around. So, yeah. Do you want to talk about the types of people that should be on the music?
We reckon this should be, sorry, that's right. It should be all sorts. It doesn't matter. Every type of disability should be on it, not just one type, or different, so we get all different side views of the issues.
Why are they?
Because the reason why I said that for us, because if you get just one view, it's an unbalanced view. If you get the different views, it's more balanced.
To extend on what Peter's saying here, is we need someone we need people in the community that are in wheelchair, that's in walkers, the ones that are blind, people that's deaf, so that they can get their understanding, so that it covers a lot of bases for their disabilities as to what difficulties they have, so that they can help the government to make the more informed decisions on how the accessibility plans going to go ahead.
There's one other I haven't talked about. Yes. In the workforce, a lot of us like jobs, except a lot of employers, and including us older ones would, except they rather hire young ones. School that not much because we have more experience, but
like to make sure there's education opportunities for people.
The education, you need education to do all these things, which is hard for some people, and deaf people, blind people, and people with speech. Speech impairment is really important for all of us to have if we work. And being in the community, that's for the workforce. Some companies rather have people who are normal, but without disabilities, because they don't have to deal with problems that may arise.
We're still having a little bit of trouble. Your screen is freezing and we can't hear you very well. So I suggest perhaps if you turn your screen off, and then perhaps we can just...
Sorry about that. We're on internet connection. Right.
Yeah, maybe try to turn your screen off, and then at least we'll be able to hear, and hopefully the interpreter can use what you're saying a bit easier. Okay, if you could talk. Can't hear anything. Are you still there? Right, I can see you're on screen. Could one of the members talk, please? Oh dear.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Talking away.
Under education and explain that the course is something for disabilities to have, and for the community with the ones that don't have disabilities, so that can as a united front.
Look, I'm sorry, people first. We're really struggling to be able to hear you at all. No, we're getting little bits. You're coming in and out. So I think the best we can do is perhaps reschedule you for another time, and hopefully there'll be a better alternative. Sorry, the bird making a terrible racket outside my window. So we might schedule you in for another time just to hear from you. But if you can hear me okay, I would be really interested in you talking a little bit from a perspective as a rural a group who are talking about taxis as opposed to public transport, and how you want one price for taxis. I'm imagining, I'm not sure, that you don't have a fully accessible and regular running bus service in Ashburton. So if we can reschedule, and we'll talk to you again. My sincere apologies. Technology sometimes fails us like this, and we do want to hear from you. So thanks for making a real effort. It's not been in our best endeavours have failed today. So with that, thank you so much. We'll hear from you another day. Our clerks will be in touch. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou, mā te wā, ka kite. So we're a little bit early for Epilepsy Waikato Charitable Trust. Do we have the trust available? Oh, look, that looks very positive. Maria, if you'd like to turn on your screen and your, thank you. So we come now to the Epilepsy Waikato Charitable Trust. Maria Lowe, the epilepsy advisor, is here with us today. Maria, do you have a camera to turn on, or are you fine as you are?
I'm just trying to find everything for you. Sorry. I thought I had everything organised, and now I can't find where my camera is. I know that I've got start video. Here I am.
There you are. Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you. It just takes me a little while to get going.
No worries at all. You're here early, so you've done well. Thank you. So thank you for your submission. It was really useful, and you've made a couple of points in there that haven't been made. So I appreciate that. Look, we've got 15 minutes with you. So at about 10 minutes, I'll give you a wave, let you know that to leave some time for questioning. It's your time entirely, so please let us know if you want to continue talking. But we do have lots of questions, I'm sure. Thank you so much. We're in your hands, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora katoa katoa. Thank you for listening to the submission on what it means to live with epilepsy in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our key aim is that epilepsy will be given disability status. In New Zealand, epilepsy is not yet acknowledged to be a disability. I hope that through my voice and the voices and visions of those experiencing the challenges of the condition, it will be heard for the first time. Aotearoa, New Zealand signed a resolution of the World Health Organization in 2015, which was aimed at ensuring that people living with epilepsy would experience improved social and health outcomes free from stigma and discrimination. By 2020, at least 80% of those countries that signed the resolution were also improving legislation with a view of promoting and protecting the human rights of people with epilepsy. Is Aotearoa, New Zealand, one of those countries? Will the human rights of people living with epilepsy be honoured by the Accessibility Bill? Epilepsy is an episodic event in the truest sense of the word. Seizures happen without warning, and depending on the severity of them, they can have a devastating effect on how well a person lives. While at least 70% of people living with epilepsy have seizure control, 30% do not. Approximately the 50,000 people who live with epilepsy in Aotearoa, New Zealand, including those most severely disadvantaged with no seizure control, face daily challenges that go well beyond the impacts of seizures to dealing with the stigma and common misunderstandings around epilepsy. Seizures involve challenges in education, uncertainties about social and employment situations, limitations on driving, mental health issues, and questions about independent living. For some people, epilepsy is a childhood disorder that seemingly goes into remission, whilst others, it is a lifelong burden. In my written submission, I pointed out the systemic failings that people with epilepsy face. I see a huge gap in services and funding for people living with epilepsy simply because it has a low priority in many health and other social systems. Epilepsy is unfairly seen as an episodic event, and as such, it is dismissed as a disability. This ignorant view and the associated stigma are pervasive within bureaucracies, and people with epilepsy and their families continue to experience discrimination because of the misconceptions and negative attitudes that surround the condition. These discriminatory attitudes lead to human rights violations and social exclusion. Our requirement is that the bill will be truly inclusive of all disabilities, including those living with epilepsy, and that it will have some guiding principles that will ensure that the social, economic, and educational needs and freedoms of persons and families affected by epilepsy are promoted, prioritized, and protected. To achieve this inclusivity, there needs to be some epilepsy awareness at all levels of society, including among government representatives and agencies. More epilepsy awareness will change the major structural and attitudinal barriers to achieving positive outcomes that ultimately will reduce stigma and discrimination, and thus promote human rights and improve the quality of life for many people. Epilepsy has to be integrated and mainstreamed to national policies, legislation, and guidelines if it is to promote and protect the rights of people with epilepsy with respect to issues found in education and employment and transport, for example. The bill must also have accountability by setting up mechanisms to monitor and evaluate the implementation of policies and legislation to ensure compliance with the Convention of the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. Speaking with you today on behalf of the Epilepsy Waikato Charitable Trust and all those we support in our region and elsewhere, my advocacy is part of a global push by the International League Against Epilepsy and the World Health Organization to improve the quality of life for those living with epilepsy and their families by 2031. The Accessibility Bill must be the mechanism for that to happen here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you for listening. Maori ora.
Thank you, Maria. A really good submission, good written one as well. It would be really useful if you could share your notes with us as well as a supplementary.
Absolutely.
That would be very helpful.
Yes.
Look, I just have a first question. So in your submission, you wrote about the difficulty with work safety and work laws and epilepsy, and the tension between safety in workplace and people with epilepsy. Can you just talk a little bit about that in terms of, I get your point, absolutely what you're saying, but I think it's worthwhile you exploring that a little bit for us here so that it's on the record. Thank you.
So quite often an employer will see health and safety as being the opportunity to dismiss somebody from employment. And what we're saying is that there has to be reasonable adjustments for that person to remain in employment. And so it is possible in many situations for that to happen, so that a person, especially if they've had a breakthrough seizure, is given that time an opportunity for the seizures to be brought back under control. So, you know, I've heard some horrible situations where people said they're just dismissed. And for me, it's about saying, well, we need to actually use reasonable adjustments to see whether or not you can be accommodated in that workplace environment. You've already have given a work, you have a work ethic. You've been employed in many situations for many years. You can't be suddenly dismissed because you have a seizure. So people find seizures frightening, and I understand that. But for 70% of people who are in employment will actually be, or have, or in fact more than 70% of people, I've probably realized, have more epilepsy control with the medications that they have. They may have sustained a breakthrough seizure. So this is a seizure that just happens for a number of reasons, and a person then has a seizure. And so it's about saying, well, let's not use the Health and Safety Act to get rid of them. Let's actually use the reasonable adjustments to actually keep people in employment. Because for a person with epilepsy, it's awful. You know, they're trying to grapple with those seizures that are happening. And at the same time, there's that fear that they're going to lose their job, and their license, which means that their whole life is jeopardized. They might have a mortgage, for example, or rents to pay, food to buy on the table. So all of that is in jeopardy when they potentially lose their job. So it's about protecting their rights and using the accommodations to secure a person in employment. And I understand there are certain jobs that a person can't do. They can't drive a plane, they can't become roofers. And so when my clients are even looking for a job, I say to them, look at the skill set that you have. There are certain things that you won't be able to do because you put in jeopardy yourselves and other people. So I do put an onus too on my clients to find a job that's not going to put other people at risk. So my worries are around people already in employment, and it's about making sure that their employment stays intact if they should have a breakthrough seizure.
Thank you. Appreciate that very fulsome response. We have time for Liz and Teresa to ask questions.
So thank you very much for a really comprehensive submission. My sense is that you would be keen to have somebody with lived experience of epilepsy around the table in terms of the committee that's being proposed. In terms of the priority, barriers that you'd like to see addressed in the first instance, what are some of the real practical barriers that those with epilepsy have that you would like to see improved in terms of accessibility within that framework?
So the barriers of transport for many people, that's a big one, especially rurally, people who live out. So I can help people directly in Hamilton, for example, with total mobility or Busset cards, but I can't help people in Monkakino in a rural. So people then suddenly become socially isolated and rely on others if they've got a network of people to actually help them. But if we don't have a means of transport, then we can't help people. Just getting help even in a health system is really important. If you live in a city, it's fine. If you live rurally, it becomes problematic. So in some of my smaller communities are really suffering for having a regular doctor. Housing is another big issue for my clients. So all the basics that we ask of our clients, or ask of people generally, are what my clients are looking for as well. The basics, and not being prejudiced for having seizures in that process, because I feel, especially around things like education, that they're pushed aside because it's seen as an episodic event, and it's not. It's about an enduring event that people with epilepsy experience. So it's about having better education, better health services, better housing facilities, so that my people also aren't socially isolated. There are lots of things that I would like them to have. So I don't know, it's difficult when there's money constraints and area constraints. It is difficult, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, that's useful.
Thank you. And we have time for Teresa Ngobi.
Thank you for your submission, Maria. And just wanted to tautoko. I've worked in supported employment for many years, worked with people with epilepsy, got them into work, and they've been amazing. And the employers have seen just such a benefit to their employment. So thank you for that. My question, though, is around, you talked about epilepsy in terms of being included in the disability, as a disability as well, and given the lack of services, that would be again a benefit to people with epilepsy. I am aware that there's the UN definition of disability, and then there's our definition in the bill. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on that. We have heard from other people that have talked about so many varying disabilities, and so your thoughts on how we could better include things like epilepsy into that definition.
Yeah, it's really hard. Now, epilepsy is an episodic event, but when you have epilepsy, it actually impacts on your life. So currently it is seen as an episodic event. So getting any funding, people say, well, it's only an episodic event. Why should we actually support you when you might not have a future in a month's time? So it's about acknowledging that there is this episodic event, but it does impact on many levels of a person's life. Mental health, for example, at least 50% of people with epilepsy will have a significant mental health problem. So it's about recognizing that mental health component and having access to the mental health support. Children who are in schools, they're denied often that extra support around teacher aides, for example, because it's seen as an episodic event. So the funding models don't actually support a person around the other aspects of their disability, which is more than the episodic event. So there we're talking about mental health, we're talking about social isolation, we're talking about anxiety, grief, suicide. So it's about treating the whole person and not seeing that one little episodic event of a seizure, but understanding that it affects every aspect of a person's life, not just the seizure. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. It looks like we've come to the end of our questions, but like I say, these are points that haven't been raised before, so I do really appreciate you submitting to us. And also on a personal note, many years ago, Epilepsy Waikato Charitable Trust supported a very dear friend of mine through, as an adult, being newly diagnosed with epilepsy, and you did some wonderful work to help and support her to live her life with this. So thank you for the work that you do for your community. It's really valuable.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we will move on to the next issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Ka kite. Now, we do have Chris Ford about to submit, but we're so very early. I propose that we suspend just for 5 minutes, have a stretch break. I know a number of you have gone in and out. Oh, Chris, you're there. All right, never mind. I take that back. Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for appearing before us. I was going to go for a quick break, but you are here, and we'll strike while the iron is hot. Good to see you. Thank you for coming before us. You have 10 minutes with us, Chris. We're running a little early, so I'll give you a sing out at about I'll give you a sing at about 5 minutes if you'd like to leave some time for questions.
That'll be fine.
Great, we're in your hands, Chris. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, Chair, and members of the Social Services and Community Select Committee. As my submission states, I am personally disappointed at the Accessibility for New Zealanders Bill as currently drafted. I, like many other disabled New Zealanders, have been before this committee and have stated that we were looking forward to the introduction of this legislation for so long. Alongside other disabled people who have appeared before this committee, I have been involved in the Access Matters campaign, which has helped to promote the case for this legislation. However, when I first read the bill myself, I was gutted to see that it had many deficiencies, which has led me and countless others to believe that this legislation needs to be withdrawn and then rewritten in a co-designed partnership with disabled people, Tangata Whaikaha, Disabled Māori, disabled people's organisations, DPOs, and the wider disabled community. If such legislation based on the social and human rights models of disability already existed, it's less likely that I would have spent 11 months of my life in emergency accommodation, namely a motel, during the peak COVID-19 years of 2020-21. In fact, there are many thousands of disabled Kiwis, like myself, who have either experienced homelessness or are currently doing so, especially in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle, and who could be in danger of becoming so unless we mandate building standards and legislation, which would see all new and retrofitted housing made accessible to universal design standards. I think that this is absolutely crucial, that the legislation needs to be strengthened so that this can be enabled. There is a need also for strong legislation to be overseen by an independent accessibility commission. This legislation could have had the ability to appoint not just a toothless committee, or actually two in this case, but actually, in my view, an actual independent entity in the form of an Accessibility for New Zealanders Commission, comprised of an overwhelming majority of people who identify as disabled people, with the power to set, monitor, review and enforce minimum standards of accessibility across a range of domains. I say a range of domains as accessibility legislation should not just cover the traditional areas of access to the physical and built environment as our current outdated laws do, but also to health, education, housing, transport, information and communications, goods and services, welfare, employment, recreation, culture, democratic and civil participation, sport and leisure. Indeed, all of the areas that are traversed in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Furthermore, the bill should clarify that the scope of enforceable standards should extend beyond central government to cover all facilities and services open or provided to the public, including in the private sector, and also by local government. Indeed, access to all facets of life for disabled people should be one of the bill's main objectives. Lastly, the legislation should mandate the creation of an accessible, free and just complaints and dispute resolution process for accessibility through the proposed Accessibility for New Zealanders Commission. I believe that Aotearoa needs the world's strongest accessibility legislation, which even surpasses that of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which has been weakened, however, through successive Supreme Court rulings there, and the Accessibility for Canadians Act. All I can say is that this government can do better than the present legislation is drafted, and the recommendations that I, other disabled people, our organisations and allies will be making and have been making in a similar vein should firmly steer government members of the committee in particular towards that view. I'm now open to taking questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. A good submission as usual. I wonder as well if you could perhaps share your notes with us as well to add to the submission you've made in writing as well. We'll come now to Maureen Pugh and then Dr. Liz Craig. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Lovely to see you back at the Select Committee. Look, as a Select Committee, we've got this bill in front of us, and I know you're saying that you'd like to send it back and start again and get it redrafted. But we've got in front of us what we've got. Can you suggest any way that we can improve what we've got to the point that it would satisfy people with disabilities, at least to get the ball rolling beyond a advisory committee or an accessibility committee?
Thank you for that question, Maureen. I just have to say that it would really have to be strengthened in the ways that I've recommended, that other people have recommended, the insertion of an enforcement mechanism, complaints mechanism, and the ability for the Commission to develop enforceable standards. I think that's absolutely vital. I think that is at least should be the starting point. And I would draw people's attention, or members' attention rather, to the submission made by Warren Forster. I understand that that was a very strong one. I think he made an argument around the fact that it should be a really strong piece of legislation that is in fact co-designed with disabled people. I think that, as I say, that having at least that inserted into the legislation would be a starting point, but really this should have been co-designed with disabled people from the outset.
Thank you.
Liz.
Okay, thanks, Chris, for a really useful submission. A number of the other submitters have been talking about a barriers notification service, and a number of them have sort of said that, that potentially could be anonymous. You're looking for a sort of more complaints and resolution service, which generally you'd probably need to have somebody in there being identifiable so that the individual circumstances could be, explored. What's your thoughts on the merit of having something that was anonymous versus what you're proposing in terms of identifying the breadth of the barriers people are facing?
Well, I think in regard to your question, it could be either that a person could remain anonymous, a complainant could remain anonymous, or they could identify themselves. However, I think that regardless of that, I believe that most of the disabled community have argued so far for both government and the private sector and the disabled community to work together and to be mandated to do that by legislation to remove barriers. I think David Lepovsky at a online forum that I attended alongside other disabled people's activists last week made that very point around the need for very strong barrier removal mechanisms and making sure that any complaints processes just don't really impede people from making complaints, but also really make sure that the mechanism is strong enough to also work proactively and strategically. Because if you just identified one barrier after another, it does take a lot of time. I can tell you that I identify many different barriers every day to my own existence in terms of, for example, going out in the community. There are footpaths which are uneven. There are no curb cuts in some places. All of these sorts of things I could spend all day on complaining about. Disabled people don't often have that energy. Therefore, it needs to be considered from on a strategic basis about eliminating all barriers across the board and on a strategic basis.
Thank you. It's useful.
Thanks, Chris. I guess the other question around the barrier register is, would you see a place for the committee having an investigative powers, so reporting occurs and then investigative powers from the committee? Would you see that as useful, or do you think it's a fully different systematic change?
I think it's fully different systematic change that is absolutely needed, because if you complained one barrier at a time, it would take forever. There would be thousands of complaints that would become ineffective, inefficient, and people would become frustrated. I think that, as I know, having gone through the human rights complaints processes myself, that it can be very time consuming, and it also can mean a long wait. I think that we really, as I say again, we need to deal with it on a systemic basis, and that means across the domains that I talked about earlier. I think that message hopefully is being conveyed to this committee and has been by, as I know, many hundreds of disabled people across the country.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate your submission. We're now at time, but thank you once again for your advocacy in this space. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Now, select committee, we're moving forward in the agenda a little fast, but we have smart access here, and then I propose we go into a break. So if we could have I believe we have 2 members from smart access coming into the committee. Hello, Timothy, I see you there. Do we have another person joining you today, Timothy?
Yes, Helena from My Life, My Voice should be here any second, hopefully.
Great. Thank you so much for coming in a little early for us. Really appreciate that. So please take your submission as being read. The select committee has 15 minutes with you. If you'd like some time for questions, please leave us some. And then from there, we'll finish for a few minutes break. So thank you, Timothy. We're just waiting for Helena to accept her.
Yes, she'll be using a screen reader, so she'll just be trying to find the button, I'm sure.
Okay, no, that's fine. We can. Would you like to start, Timothy? Or there's Helena there now.
Great.
If you'd like to start, and I'll give you a sing out at about 10 minutes into the submission. Thanks so much.
Sure. Is Helena here, just so because she'll be following along with my writing to know when to add?
Yes, Helena is here, and welcome to Helena. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we absolutely can.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Thanks. We're in your hands.
Cool. Kia ora tātou, ko taranaki te maunga, ko Ngāti Mahuta te mana whenua, e tupu ahau e kirikiri-rawa, kei ngā rewa wahia e noho ana ahau, ko Tim Young toku ingoa. My name is Tim Young, and I'm the CEO of Smart Access. We collect data on infrastructure according to universal design principles and provide that data to councils to better prioritise spending and we have an app that allows disabled people and older people to see the journey, see the data to plan a safe journey. I'm also the Chief Executive of My Life, My Voice, and with me is one of our lead community capacity builders, Helena Tutiao.
Kia ora, Tim. Ko taupere te maunga, ko Waikato te awa, ko Ngāti Mahuta te hapu, ko Tainui te iwi, ko Helena Tutiao aho. And so My Life, My Voice is a disabled person's organisation, and we're governed entirely by disabled people, tangata whaikaha. And 76% of our staff are disabled people. We provide a peer support network so that disabled people can share stories, experiences, and resources with each other. And so we also support disabled people in tangata whaikaha and their whānau into the Enabling Good Lives approach. And we also have a Kaitū Hono connector role to support disabled people with their personalised budget. And so first off, we would like to commend the government on the establishment of Waikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People, the nationwide rollout of Enabling Good Lives, and the intent to develop the accessibility for New Zealanders Bill. We would, however, like to express our disappointment with the Accessibility for New Zealand Bill as it stands. So it's our opinion that not only does it go far enough, but it barely goes anywhere at all. So from what we have seen, the main purpose of the bill is to create an accessibility committee. And so we know that this is a missed opportunity. And so what ourselves, and I'm sure you'll hear our other colleagues were hoping for, were concrete steps and targets.
This bill was something that many disabled people have been waiting for decades. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't mean this impolitely, but I'm under the impression that you don't need a bill to create an advisory committee. And the fact that no other targets or mandates were set has been disappointing. To me, it seems like you would set up a committee without having goals attached. That would be something you'd do if you didn't have any idea on how to improve accessibility. It seems after all these years that no one had been listening to all of our submissions on how to improve accessibility. I've been part of groups providing information to ministers and MPs on how to improve accessibility since 2019, and Helena has been pointing out ways to improve for over a decade. If some ideas were put forward for targets in the original bill, then at this point we could help fine-tune those and provide more feedback. But seeing as no targets or mandates have been set, it feels like there's nothing to work from, and we almost may as well start from scratch. If you did start again, I'm sure you could set up a committee beforehand to see what effective accessibility legislation looks like. You know, such a group could research what has worked well in other countries. And honestly, just as a starting point, you could ask an artificial intelligence bot what accessibility good accessibility legislation looks like. I'm not joking. This weekend I asked ChatGPT to, in quotes, write effective accessibility legislation for disabled people. And it actually came out with a pretty good answer. It said, first off, there needs to be clear definitions. It said the scope needs to be across sectors, including transportation, IT, and communications. That for compliance, the legislation should require new and existing facilities and services to accommodate the needs of disabled people. That reasonable accommodations be made for disabled people. Universal design principles should be followed in infrastructure. There should be more education and training across sectors. There needs to be enforcement and policies. All information should be accessible. There should be consultation and involvement of disabled people, and legislation should be reviewed and updated regularly. So not bad. ChatGPT did not invent these recommendations. It simply searched the internet for knowledge that is already present, and much of it has been present for decades. We already know what to do. We just need our politicians to have the courage to do it. The Child Poverty Reduction Act included a range of targets, definitions to ensure targets were measurable, indicators and reports on progress towards targets regularly. The government knows how to do it, and they owe the disability community, they owe it to us to develop an equally ambitious and specific bill and to get it right first time round.
Awesome. And so in short, due to there being no targets or measurable outcomes, the bill lacks accountability and has no teeth. And so putting forward a half-baked bill and having it passed would be worse than kicking it down the road further, as it somewhat closes the door on any major reforms for at least a few terms. And so what we need is a bill that sets targets and mandates, progress reports in relation to a range of portfolios, such as the Ministry of Education, Health, Waikato, Kāinga Ora, MSD, and MBIE. Does anybody have any questions for us?
Thank you. A really useful submission. It would be very helpful if we could have your written notes as well. It'd be if you could send them into the clerks as well. So
Sure.
We've got a question from Anahila and then one from Tony. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora kōrua. Thank you for your information. We've heard what you've said, and there has been some suggestions in terms of rewriting the whole bill and having standards and everything that you've said. Notwithstanding that, I just want to ask you questions around the appointment of membership of the committee. So it talks about the minister appointing, it talks about the formation of a Māori panel to appoint Māori membership to the committee. Do you think there's a place there where it could specifically say youth in that space? Or yeah.
Specifically, have youth in the committee? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, because at the moment it talks about the minister establishing a Māori nominations panel to appoint one or more, but it doesn't specifically say youth.
I think it would be really important to include youth personally. I think, they have different challenges, and, building a community and using technology is, more top of mind for young people. So I think it would be really important to do that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you, because your submission today has been insightful and confirmation that youth do have a voice, younger people, they must have a voice that is impactful and can add value. So, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Come now to Tony. We are nearly at time though, team. So
just a quick question. I understand that you've got a system where you've got notification systems already and that you're already helping local councils with notifications and a system I'm assuming that's already out there. And so you're already gathering data and supplying it. How well is that working? Just quickly.
Yes. For those councils that have, this is Smart Access, not My Life, My Voice. Wellington have got their entire city being audited. Rotorua did bus stops, so it's just picking up, and we've got some more clients in Australia as well. So it would be good if it was mandated nationwide. Obviously, we could do probably the entire country for about $3 million, which I don't think is a whole heap. So it would be good if it was mandated in legislation, obviously, but at the moment it's just up to councils who are forward thinking.
Thank you.
I'm very sorry, Maureen and Jan, we're actually at time now, and we are due to have a break. I'm mindful that we need to be doing that because we have a full day ahead of us. Timothy, Helena, really useful submission, and your notes will really add to your written submission as well. So thank you for your time with us today. Really appreciate it. And keep up the awesome work. It sounds like a fascinating area that you're working in. So with that, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all for your time, and sorry we didn't leave more time for questions. Thanks, everyone.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.
So we're now going to move into a break, and we will be resuming back at 11:50 a.m. So if you could come on a minute or two beforehand, so we're ready to go at 11:50. Ka kite. Thank you. Meeting is suspended. Tēnā koutou. We're back in the Social Services Select Committee, and we are now about to hear from Natasha Astill. Natasha, I know that you are about to come onto the system. If you could, thank you. If you could turn on your camera if you'd like to, and your microphone. Hello, Natasha. Thank you. Thank you so much for your submission. Do you require a descriptor from us? Onto the system, if you could, thank you. If you could turn on your camera if you'd like to, and your microphone. Hello, Natasha. Thank you. Thank you so much for your submission. Do you require a descriptor?
No.
Thank you. Turn on your camera if you'd like to, and your hello. Natasha, I think you're looping. Your submission. Do you require a
Oh, there we go. Hold on. All good now. I think it's not feedbacking.
Right.
Can
Awesome.
everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you, Natasha. Appreciate you being able to handle that technology. I often have a little moment where I think, oh, my advice is not going to be very helpful here. Turning your computer off doesn't work in these instances often. Look, Natasha, thank you for coming before us. Do you require a descriptor of those of us in the Zoom room?
No, I don't require one.
Great. So we have you here for 10 minutes. Please take your submissions, including your written, what you're speaking to today, as read, and we're in your hands. If you'd like to leave some time for questions, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction and the information that you just provided. Good morning. My name is Natasha Astill, and I am a disability advocate. I am based in Auckland. I have lived experience with an invisible disability called fetal valproate syndrome. This syndrome occurs when someone is pregnant and is taking an anti-seizure medication called Epilepsy, and it affects the baby. For me, this has caused lifelong issues, both mentally and physically. I am also a mobility scooter user. In my written submission, I wrote about how there needs to be a barrier notification system in place. The reason why I think it would be important is because I have had limited access to the community because of barriers. For example, most recently, I was on my mobility scooter one morning going to a local cafe, and when I was returning, I was interrupted by a barrier. This barrier was roadworks on the footpath. The footpath at the end of the street was blocked off and with cones and signs as they were putting new concrete in. There weren't any driveways nearby to cross the road, so I had to turn around, but the pathway was too skinny, so I had two options: go on the curb or hit the tree. So I went on the curb and I got stuck. Luckily, there was a member of public there to help. I had to go on the road with my hazard lights on, which isn't the safest option for someone who is in a mobility scooter. I do have more examples, as this is a frequent issue for me accessing my wider community. Another example is when I just went to the shops with my support worker. There wasn't any notification prior to the roadworks happening, and I wouldn't have been able to access the footpath by mobility scooter. And if there was a notification system for the previous examples, I would have been notified ahead of time to go to a safer alternative route. The barrier notification system needs to happen sooner rather than later, as currently the disabled community are being excluded from accessing the wider community when they should be included in it. Also, another reason why there needs to be a barrier notification system is when there is a natural disaster, for example, the recent cyclones and flooding, the disabled community weren't notified ahead of time of the barriers that were going to occur, such as surface flooding and trees, and that those examples. And also they were disrupted by the public transport services, especially in Auckland. And
that's 5 minutes, Natasha.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to my oral submission. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Natasha. I actually do have a question. So some of the other submitters have talked to us about a barrier notification system, in the sense that they would notify that there is a barrier, and that would be data being collected. But you've taken it further in that you're saying a barrier notification system, and then what? Which is letting people get access to that information so that they can plan their lives better. Have I understood you correctly?
Yes. There needs to the barrier notification needs to with the points you were just saying, that they people need to be notified.
Right. So that's the I guess that's a really useful suggestion, in that one of the things that we've heard is about this being used as a collection process, so that barriers were notified and then the committee could evaluate that or investigate that. But what you're suggesting is then that becomes part of the public record in some way, so that people with accessibility needs can drill down and check that their street is safe or their need is there. So thank you for that. If I've understood you correctly, that's a really useful part of what you've said, useful for our submission process. So I'll move on to Jan Logie now, and then Maureen Pugh. Thank you.
Thanks for your submission, Natasha. It was really clear and great, useful examples for us. I'm just checking. I'm assuming that you would also support a bill that would create some standards so that when people are doing roadworks, that they think about the access needs of people using mobility aids and factor that into the design of how they do their work.
Yes, I would be in support of that, and also regarding that, I think there would also be much needed consultation process for that as well.
Cool, thank you.
And Maureen.
Thanks very much. I realise we're going to run out of time. Natasha, thanks very much for your submission. When I heard you talking about it, it immediately reminded me about the NZTA website. So you can go on there and see where roadworks are planned and the duration and the times, etc. So understand that. You've also mentioned in your written submission about having an independent regulator. So can you just expand on your thinking behind that and what you anticipate that independent regulator would be doing?
So they would be involved with with the process regarding if someone was unable to say or what their needs are for the access barrier, or just like to help them as a support person as such.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Natasha, for your submission. Very useful and gives us some more food for thought. Thank you. We are about to move on to the next submitter, but thank you so much for coming in and submitting for us. Ka kite. Now, we're trying to contact the next submitter. Just if one of the clerks could let us know how we're getting on. We have Loren Glenn and or Media Access Charitable Trust trading as able coming.
Hi, Madam Chair. The next submitter has not joined yet, and neither has the submitter after that. We're just getting in contact with Loren Glenn, and we'll contact Media Access as well.
Thank you. Perhaps we shall suspend for 5 minutes, just while we wait for the members to join. Meeting suspended. Tēnā koutou anō. We are having a little trouble getting Loren, so we're going to move now directly to Media Access Charitable Trust, trading as able. A really useful submission, in my opinion. If we could please have Dan Buckingham, the Chief Executive, into the room. Hello, Dan, I can see you there. Hello, thank you for your submission, a really interesting submission, actually. I really appreciate you putting it forward for us. We have you for 15 minutes, and I do appreciate you coming in early to help us with our agenda. Yeah, we have you for 15 minutes. If you'd like, I can sing out at 10 minutes to let you know to leave some time for questions, but this is your time, absolutely. Thank you for appearing. Thank you for your written submission, and we're completely in your hands. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'm intrigued about the written submission. It seems so long ago now, I have to revisit, but we live and breathe this up, so I think I'm good to go. Kia ora, my name is Dan Buckingham, ko Dan Buckingham tōku ingoa. I'm a 42-year-old Pākehā male with brown hair, bluish eyes, the unshaven look, a blue shirt, sitting in an office space with an office building behind me. What can't be seen on screen is I use a wheelchair for mobility due to a spinal cord injury. I'm here representing ABLE, which is the trading name for the Media Access Charitable Trust. And ABLE is a fantastic example of private-public collaboration. We're a private entity that is a charitable trust, a not-for-profit, and we use public money which comes from MCH via NZ On Air, and we are accountable to NZ On Air in terms of KPIs, deliverables, etc. And we do fantastic work. Historically set up to deliver to free-to-air TV. We currently caption 100% of TVNZ2, close to 100% of TVNZ1, the majority of Duke. We recently launched live captions and audio description on Discovery, and we deliver to Prime. We've been delivering audio description to TVNZ since 2011. Digital is our future. We're currently working with the broadcaster video on demand platforms, as well as smaller entities that house relevant content, such as NZ On Air funded content that is published on the likes of RNZ, the Spinal stuff, etc. So Able is a machine. We deliver every week over 500 broadcast hours of captions and over 100 broadcast hours of audio description. Now, I say all this not claiming any credit for the work. I'm a relative newcomer to Able. I feel like more of a cheerleader on the sidelines at times. But I have had the pleasure of joining a team that is passionate, cares about the craft, and cares about the audiences we serve. Those who are blind, deaf, hard of hearing, visually impaired, and deafblind. Of course, with any good example of universal design, we also serve many others. We serve people for whom English is a second language, people who have challenges with literacy, and it seems all of Generation Z who seem to watch content with captions on. While I'm new to the organisation, part of my induction was zeroing in on how we operate in an environment here in New Zealand without legislation, as public media generally came into the spotlight last year with the ANZ PM bill. For those that aren't across that, that's the merger of RNZ, TVNZ that has essentially fallen over since. Able had to decide with that process on its position on what was the best way forward for media access services from a legislative point of view. The background is we operate differently. Many of the countries people are quick to compare New Zealand with, Australia, Canada, GB, USA, they all have legislation in place. New Zealand doesn't. Yet what we have works. It's a different way of doing things where Able is effectively an agnostic provider of services that delivers to all broadcasters. So, and we do that with the audiences we serve at the heart of any decisions we make. So it's a unique model, unique to New Zealand, unique to the New Zealand media environment, and unique to the budgets that the broadcasters work on. And it really does work. So I guess I give all that background to say that while it may seem like the logical step for greater access services will be to introduce legislation, knowing the complexities and the nuances of the broadcast industry and the flow-on effect of such legislation, ultimately the position we came to for ABLE last year in the RNZPM bill environment still stands, and that is that legislation for media access services would not be a good pathway forward for making media more accessible for the New Zealand environment. To focus on what's in front of us, the Accessibility for New Zealanders bill, I think we can reflect on how ABLE positioned itself for the ANZPM legislation and think about how what may be seen as the obvious way forward isn't necessarily the best way forward. And I say all this given, having watched many of the presentations that have gone before me, I fear I will be presenting an unpopular opinion here, but I think the proposed legislation does have the propensity to work well. Having a stick is not always necessary. And I say this while acknowledging the work that has been done by many to get us here today involved a lot of hard work, a lot of banging the table when necessary. And I also say this knowing that having strong accessibility legislation with teeth in place, say 20 to 30 years ago, is probably what was needed then. But I believe the focus now in 2023 and the way forward is about working with people and understanding the challenges and parameters they are working within. And I think ABLE is an example of how to achieve this. So sticking specifically to my warehouse of making it media accessible, I believe the proposed legislation will work as we continue to work with good people who are seeking to make change over time, including the broadcasters and the platforms we deliver to. I guess ultimately, I just believe that there are good people seeking to do good work who work within the system and the parameters in front of them. I believe in iterative change. I believe in the aggregation of marginal gains, and I believe that this legislation, if passed, will move the accessibility of Aotearoa forward. Conversely, the absence of the legislation, if we go back to the drawing board, I think that will hold New Zealand back for many years to come. That's the end of my presentation. I open up to the floors while also acknowledging, I guess, the caveat that one opinion amongst many. It's probably the best way to put it, and valuing many others who have said and spoke before me. Questions?
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate your submission. Were you reading from a statement? And if you were, could we have that as well? Really useful to add to your submission.
High-level bullet points, which I can fear through.
Oh, great.
We'll fill in the gaps as they see fit.
Thank you. We'll move now.
As well.
We'll move now to a question from Dr. Liz Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. One of the issues that's been raised by some of the submitters in the last few days is around movies and accessibility issues there. What scope do you think we've got for improving accessibility to those that want to attend movie theatre with potentially whānau and need some assistance? Is the technology there yet, and how do we improve access to that?
The technology is moving forward. I guess the two big things we're talking about here are captions and audio description. So captions for a movie environment, you have the option of having open captions for everyone to watch captions. Affects the experience for all. And then there are other options where you have, I guess, an extra theatre device that has the captions with you. So none of the solutions, I guess, are ideal at this stage, but I think the technology moves quickly in this environment, so we will see other options coming forward. Audio description, similarly, you can have the audio track on, or you can have a device where you listen through headphones. Air catch is a very interesting piece of technology that's coming forward that we're currently in conversation with the people who provide the service, and that's effectively an app that syncs with the audio that's being heard ambiently and provides the extra AD track through your device, which you can listen to with earphones. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so it sounds like the technology is starting to be there, but it may be that it's apps as that technology evolves that users can take along to the theatre themselves. I mean, that sounds like what you're saying is where it's going.
Yeah, so I guess there's different parts to it. There's the technology which is moving forward at an amazing rate. Really, when we think about how quickly it's come in that acceleration of change, but then it is implementing it and and where it falls, I guess, in the funding as well. For AWOL, we're very much focused on free-to-air broadcast, and that's been our remit. And we're really acknowledging that with our latest edition of our strategic plan that we're looking to finalise, where we come from this delivery to linear broadcast, and we're moving to an environment where we want to deliver where the audiences are. Audiences are fragmented, audiences are watching in different places. But also keeping within that remit of when we're working with public money, NZ On Air money, free to air is our primary focus. Movies, we're getting into a paid environment, so it does get a bit more complicated. And I guess that's also the difficulty here. When you present in this environment, you got 10 to 15 minutes. There's a lot of complexities, and that's probably a massive point I want to get across to people is, it can be great to roll out one-liner, let's have legislation for media accessibility, and then you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you see the complexities, the nuances, the flow-on effects, the different environments. When you talk about the media environment, it's just so complex, so many different outlets. Audiences are increasingly fragmented.
Okay, thanks, that's useful.
Thank you. We'll come now to Teresa Ngobi.
Oh, kia ora, Dan, and thanks so much for your information. And really exciting to hear about, the new technologies that are hopefully coming forward and make a difference for Waikato. I was really interested in hearing, obviously, your view around not having to sort of hit that big stick or the, standards and regulations. And having, you said just heard some of the submissions that are coming forward. So I guess, do you think that we need to have some kind of strengthening there or not at all? And if we did, aside from, I guess, a big stick, as you put it, what else do you think we could do and to make sure that where it isn't working, so we are relying on hopefully the majority of New Zealanders' goodwill and wanting to do the right thing by everyone, including making sure accessibility is there for Waikato. For those, I'd like to think the minority that don't, what is the recourse, or what is the pathway, or do you have any thoughts on the pathway that people could take to make sure that there isn't a barrier to the accessibility? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, again, trying to deliver something in 10 to 15 minutes, I can get torn apart for being naive and what's the word, Pollyanna, thinking that everyone's going to do good in the world when people won't. And when the bottom line comes into play, when someone's doing a development, they're creating a bunch of houses, are they going to do the goodwill, or are they going to look at the bottom line and what it costs? So I think, hard to distill it down. I think there does need to be recourse. It doesn't need to be all captured within one accessibility bill when access is so fraud. Disability is so complex. Disability covers such a wide remit. How do we do it all with one big hit? And I think people are looking for this magical silver bullet that doesn't exist. It does need to be built into all our other pieces of legislation. The building code is where that aspect that I just touched on needs to sit. I guess trying to make sense of it all, to have what we have in front of us is something that I see could work across all other pieces of legislation and all other groups, interested parties, and have input into these areas. I think to go the nuclear option, take it back and try to introduce something that is all-encompassing, robust teeth, all the things that are being talked about, it would just interact with other pieces of legislation in a way that would break them or create years of unraveling, and we wouldn't see change for such a long period of time. I guess to answer your question, I find it difficult, but I think the short answer for the period of time is recourse is great. The flow-on effect, the flow-on question is, how do we build that in? How do we make it happen? How do we do it without creating further flow-on effects that hold us back further?
Thanks, Dan. We have come to the end of time, but I really appreciate your submission, and have to say, I don't think it's Pollyanna. I think it's your glass is half full, and that's always a nice thing to hear. So with that, thank you very much for submitting. Great submission. Appreciate your time.
I appreciate it's potentially an unpopular opinion I've submitted. If anyone ever wants to talk to me, I'm always up for the conversation.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. Ka kite.
Ka kite. Thank you.
So we're now going to switch back to Loren Glenn, who is available by Zoom to come into the room now. Welcome, Loren. I can see that you are in the Zoom room. If you could turn on your camera if you'd like to, and also turn on your microphone. You are our last submitter for the day.
Hi.
Hi, Loren.
Hi. What I'd like to see for people with learning disabilities is be able to have internet, like doing for banking and stuff, internet banking. And also people who are capable, like me and my other friends, would like to live together. And also we would like to be able to use our own cards to do food shopping. At the moment, I'm living with ID services, and we're not allowed to use the cashless cards to do our own shopping.
Have you got more that you want to tell us, Loren?
It's like, because you're in organisations, you're not allowed to use the food cards to do our own food shopping, and I think that's really doesn't make us feel independent enough. It's like, it's just makes us feel like that we can't learn. They won't let us learn how to have our own food cards for shopping through the organisations. And also the banks are not very accessible either. They won't let organisations have banking cards for food shopping. It's only for the staff to use for our food shopping because we're in an organisation. And some of us who are quite capable would like to do that. And we have gone through to ID services about it, but they keep saying it's an organisation thing, and because banks won't let them, only the staff are allowed. So that doesn't make us independent enough. We feel like we really want to learn how to shop with food cards, so we can learn how to budget and stuff. Because some of us are quite capable, not many of them, but like me and Sarah and Tony, we all want to learn how to use our own food cards to do food shopping through organisations, and they're not very flexible when it comes to stuff like that. And I just feel that's giving us feeling like we're discrimination, that we can't use food cards for ourselves to do it.
So, Loren, in your submission, you said that people always tell me what is best for me.
Yeah, and that's like ID services. They tell me what's best for them and for me. Basically, yeah. I feel like I'm getting told what to do, that I can't have a card to do my own food shopping.
So, with our bill on accessibility, and so one of the things that the bill is doing is it's setting up a committee. Do you think that having a committee is going to, or two committees, is going to help you have your voice heard a bit better?
Yes, it is. I think that is a good idea, actually, because I think it's about time that people with learning disabilities need to have a voice in organisations, that we need to have more voice. It's like we're not really listened to. We're not really treated like adults. They're treating us like we're kids and children and babies. It's like we feel like we're adults. And I think that'd be a good idea, so we get more of a say in what's going on around accessibility.
Thanks. I think you've written a really good submission here. Really appreciate it that you've said that you feel anxious and that you feel frustrated. And I think that that's a very brave thing to put in writing and to come before us and to tell us. Is there any questions from the select committee for Loren? No, there doesn't appear to be, Loren. So I just want to thank you for coming in and talking with us today. I really appreciate it. It's been a good submission.
That's fine.
And
don't mind helping out when it comes to people with learning disabilities, to be there as a representative for them.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks so much for that. And have a good rest of your day. Take care.
You too.
Ka kite.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There we go. I think that's a beautiful way to end our public session of our select committee. If we can, that brings us to the end of this part of our Social Services Select Committee on the Accessibility for New Zealanders Bill. We will now go into a closed session, and then I think we have we're about to then start again at 1 p.m. for new select committees. So if we could just whip into closed session, that would be great. Thank you. Ka kite.